The sun had just begun to rise behind the ancient trees of Buckhead, one of the wealthiest and most private neighborhoods in Atlanta. There stood the grand Whitmore mansion, wrapped in towering white columns and mirrored windows that reflected the first light of day. Silence reigned there like an unspoken law, and power breathed through the air like something inherited. Inside that stillness, the footsteps of Kenya Johnson echoed faintly across polished marble floors, each step measured and purposeful. She wore a navy blue uniform with a crisp white apron, her knees resting on the stone as she scrubbed the last section of the hallway. Her hands were rough from years of work, yet moved with grace and control, as if she had mastered both fatigue and time. The morning sunlight pouring through tall glass panels cast a warm glow on her dark skin, giving it a quiet radiance. Her hair was neatly pinned back, revealing sharp features and a quiet pride that no one could mistake. In that house, no one spoke of Kenya, but everyone knew when she was near. At that same hour, out in the pristine garden, a young blonde girl struck blow after blow against a jiu-jitsu dummy. Brooke Whitmore, the youngest daughter of the family, was born into silk sheets and silver spoons. Her beauty was sharp, her ponytail tight, her gaze narrow and mistrusting. She wore a white guy with her name embroidered in gold, and each time her fist landed, a faint smile curved across her lips, not of joy, but of self-assurance. She was not training to grow stronger. She was training to remind herself that nothing could touch her. Not here, not anywhere. From inside, Kenya could hear the sounds of the garden. She did not flinch, but a familiar discomfort rose in her chest. She had known that energy before, the kind of arrogance that dressed itself as discipline. Kenya continued to clean, her movements steady. She was always watching, even when no one noticed. A moment later, the front door opened. The family driver walked in, dragging behind him 2 elegant suitcases. Then came Ethan Whitmore, the eldest son. Taller, quieter, dressed in rolled-up linen sleeves and dark jeans. His hair was tousled, his green eyes calm. He moved through the house like someone revisiting a memory both familiar and far away. As he walked down the main hall, his eyes landed on Kenya. She was still kneeling, still wiping the floor. For a brief second, neither of them moved. His gaze lingered, not in judgment, but in thought. Kenya instinctively turned away, but her chest tightened. It had been a long time since someone looked at her not with dismissal, but with attention. Ethan politely stepped aside and said sorry. Kenya nodded gently, eyes still down, but her heart began to race. Ethan paused longer than he should have eyes fixed where she had just stood. Then the housekeeper appeared and told him that his mother was still resting and asked if he would join them for lunch. He nodded, but his gaze did not return to the hallway. It remained where she had vanished. That afternoon, while the kitchen bustled with preparations, Kenya passed by the open door and saw Ethan laughing with the cook. He asked her about the peach sauce she used to make when he was a boy. Kenya stood for a second, then walked on. Something about him felt different. He did not seem like a man who judged others by what they wore or where they worked, and to her that was rare. But what Kenya did not yet know, what no one in that house could possibly know, was that this brief glance in a hallway was only the beginning. That this quiet Sunday morning was the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. And through that crack, something unexpected was about to enter. Something stronger than power. Something deeper than silence. That afternoon draped the garden in a velvet-like calm, warm yet tight. Inside the grand Whitmore kitchen, the scent of roasted butter and sweet corn spread through the air. Under soft golden light, Kenya continued her work in silence. She washed crystal glasses in the stone sink with steady rhythm, yet her mind replayed the moment from that morning. Ethan's eyes, the way he looked, without pity, without distance, just presence. Nothing was said aloud, nothing dramatic, but something subtle inside her had shifted like a door creaked open in a long-sealed room. Then came the sound of footsteps, firm, confident, deliberate. Kenya lifted her eyes just slightly. Brooke entered, hair still damp from a shower, wearing tight black leggings and a gray hoodie with the gym's name embroidered across the chest. Phone in one hand, but her focus was on something else entirely. She stood watching eyes, following Ethan, who remained in the far corner of the kitchen, laughing with the cook like he belonged there. Then her gaze slowly turned toward Kenya. It was not curiosity. It was discomfort dressed as control. Brooke approached the counter, a faint smirk curling at the corner of her lips. Her words came soft but sharp. Funny how some people forget where they come from just because someone notices them. The kitchen paused. One worker froze mid-step. The cook looked up from her pot. Even Ethan, standing with a glass of water in hand, turned his head. Kenya held her breath, then placed the final glass on the tray, dried it with precision, and spoke without raising her voice. "I have not forgotten where I come from, Miss Brooke. That is exactly why I know where I stand." Brooke's smile faltered for a breath, but she caught herself and let out a dry laugh. "Sure. But lately, some staff seem a little too distracted. Looking up too much can give you a neck-ache." Kenya faced her with the same calm tone. Sometimes looking up is the only way to remember the sky still exists. Ethan could not stand it anymore. He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Brooke, what is your problem?" She blinked, pretending surprise. "My problem? I was just talking." "You were not talking," Ethan said, moving closer. "You were attacking." "And for what?" "Because someone dared to exist near you without bowing." The air in the kitchen grew thick. Brooke let out another sarcastic laugh, but her hands betrayed her. Her grip on the phone tightened. "You are too sensitive, Ethan. Always have been." "Maybe," he replied, staring directly at her. "But at least I still know what respect is." Brooke turned and stormed out her steps hard on the polished tiles. She did not speak again. She did not need to. The damage had already been done. Kenya stood still, not because she felt humiliated, but because she had been exposed. She had never liked being the center of anything. She had never asked to be seen, but now she had been seen. Ethan approached quietly. "I am sorry about her," Kenya replied without looking at him. "It is not the first time someone speaks to me like that, but it is the first time someone speaks up for me." Ethan had no words. He only stood there, the weight of what she said settling in his chest like a stone. Outside, the sky had begun to change. The soft glow of afternoon light now gave way to a gray hue, as if the weather itself sensed something was shifting. But inside Kenya, that shift had already begun. The Whitmore house, once a place of cold elegance and silent commands, had started to crack, and through those cracks, light was finding its way in. The next morning arrived without warmth. The sunlight was sharp, slicing through the tall windows and drawing long lines across the floor of the Whitmore mansion. The house was quiet in a strange way, as if something had shifted, but no one dared to name it. Kenya, as always, moved through her work with precision. Today, she had been assigned to clean the old trophy room tucked behind the library, a space rarely used and barely remembered. The wooden door creaked as she opened it. Dust floated in the air like suspended breath. The room smelled of old wood and forgotten pride. Shelves lined the walls filled with plaques, medals, and framed photographs, all curated with a vanity that had been carefully preserved over the years. Kenya set her bucket down and began to wipe the surfaces one by one. Her hands were calm, but her eyes were sharp. She was never fooled by polish and shine. She had learned to read what was not written. Toward the back of the room, something made her stop. A photo in a silver frame caught the light. Brooke stood in a white jai, a gold medal around her neck, a black belt tied proudly around her waist. Beside her was their father, George Whitmore, beaming with pride, so theatrical it felt rehearsed. Kenya picked up the photo, and for a moment her breath hitched. She was not looking at Brooke. She was looking at herself, or at least a version of who she used to be. 10 years, she whispered, and no one ever knew. No one in this house knew that she too had trained in jiu-jitsu. That at 13 in the basement of a church, she had learned to fight not for glory, but for survival. That while others were praised in bright rooms, she was breaking down silently in the dark, her only sanctuary, the worn-out mat and the sweat-stained lessons of resilience. She never wore a jai with her name, never held a medal in front of cameras, but she had technique, she had strength, and she had something no one in this house had ever bothered to see. She placed the photo back on the shelf, her face now calm, not from surrender, but from memory. The kind of memory that rises from the deep, not to haunt, but to remind. That day, during a rare midday break, Kenya sat beneath the crooked old tree in the backyard. She slipped off her shoes and pressed her feet into the cool grass. She tilted her head back, letting the sunlight hit her closed eyes, as if she was reaching inward for balance. For silence. Not the kind that suppresses, but the kind that restores. Do you like silence? Ethan's voice came from behind, soft and respectful. He carried a cup of tea and wore a linen shirt sleeves pushed up as usual. Something about his approach made Kenya stay seated. She did not flinch. Sometimes silence is the only place you can still hear yourself, she said, without turning. He sat down beside her, keeping a careful distance. I saw you in the trophy room today. Were you looking at Brooke? Kenya took a slow breath. I was remembering. Remembering what? Who I used to be. Or maybe who I still am, even if no one knows. Ethan stayed quiet, letting her speak. I trained jiu-jitsu for 10 years. Not to compete. It was the only place where the world stopped hurting. She told him with few words, but a voice full of weight, about how she lost her partner to a robbery. No one cared to explain about the night she spent scrubbing staircases and the hours she clung to training so she would not fall apart. I am not just the woman who scrubs these floors, Mr. Ethan, and I do not want pity. I just want respect. Ethan looked at her with something deeper than surprise. You sound like someone who has fought more off the mat than on it. She looked at him this time without looking away. Because it is true. The silence between them was different now. Heavier, but filled with something real. It was no longer just words. It was the beginning of shared truths. Ethan smiled quietly, genuinely. I would love to see you fight one day. Maybe one day you will, Kenya replied, rising to her feet and slipping her shoes back on. But the real fights in this house do not happen in the ring. As she walked away, Ethan watched her leave like someone who had just discovered a hidden chapter in a book he thought he already knew. And for the first time, he did not see an employee. He saw a woman, and he knew without question that he would never see her any other way again. That evening, the lights inside the Whitmore mansion glowed brighter than usual. Glass chandeliers bathed the long dining table in golden light, where a white linen cloth draped over French porcelain crystal glasses and silver cutlery arranged with surgical precision. It was Saturday night, traditionally reserved for family, but tonight there were unfamiliar faces. A longtime investor, two local politicians, and a renowned jiu-jitsu coach invited specially by Brooke. She hid her excitement well, but not completely. Ever since learning about Kenya's past, something in her had begun to stir. A strange discomfort that wrapped itself in pride. She could not let it go. Kenya wore the formal staff uniform, a white blouse with tight cuffs, black slacks, neatly pressed, her hair pulled into a perfect bun. She moved through the room with poise, pouring wine with a steady hand and quiet presence. She did not seek attention, but she noticed everything, including the way Brooke glanced at her, not with curiosity, but with a silent fury laced with something deeper. Something that did not come from the present, but from fear of what might come next. Ethan sat at the other end of the table, more casually dressed than the rest, but no less composed. He talked politely with an older guest, but every now and then his eyes drifted toward Kenya. He did not hide it anymore. And Brooke noticed. She always noticed when she was no longer the center of the room. After dessert, when the wine had softened voices and the lines between host and guest had begun to blur, Brooke leaned slightly toward the coach beside her, smiling with studied ease. "Funny thing," she said, loud enough for the entire table today. "I found out one of our staff members has 10 years of jiu-jitsu experience. Can you imagine that? 10 years and no one knew." The table paused. Some guests exchanged glances. Kenya stood near the fireplace, arranging the empty glasses on a silver tray. Her shoulders remained firm, her hands precise. Brooke continued, her voice light but sharp. "Kenya, is it true, or did you learn from YouTube?" A few laughed. Others looked away, unsure whether to react. Ethan sat up, tension creeping into his posture. Kenya turned slowly, meeting Brooke's gaze. Her voice was clear. "It is true. I learned the hard way, but I learned." Brooke raised an eyebrow. "Then why have you never competed? 10 years and no trophies. What a waste." Kenya smiled, not with her lips, but with her soul. "Some trophies we carry on the inside. Silence spread like fog." Brooke lifted her wineglass, smile still fixed. "If you are that confident, how about a friendly match? Just for fun, of course. Let us see if your theory works in practice." Nervous laughter circled the room. Ethan stared at his sister. Their mother coughed gently, clearly uncomfortable. Kenya did not flinch. She gently crossed her arms and answered with a calm that struck harder than any shout. "Be careful what you wish for. Sometimes you get it." Brooke kept smiling, but her eyes no longer matched her mouth. Deep down, she knew she had pushed too far. "Then it is settled," she said, raising her glass like sealing a deal. Sunday late afternoon, nothing serious. Kenya picked up the tray and walked out of the room with her head held high. Ethan remained seated, eyes fixed on nothing. He understood. This was not a joke. This was not play. It was a trap set with elegance and cruelty. And he also knew Kenya was not someone who let herself be broken without a fight. Upstairs, Brooke stood at her window, staring into the dark garden. The wind rustled the tall trees like it sensed the storm approaching. She told herself she was in control, but control had already left the room hours ago. Sunday afternoon arrived, wrapped in calm skies and gentle light. The sun cast a warm glow over the back garden of the Whitmore mansion, where the lawn had been trimmed to perfection and transformed into a temporary fighting ring. White chairs were arranged in a neat circle around a jiu-jitsu mat laid down just that morning. But it was not the weather that held the air still, it was the tension. Guests did not come to support or to cheer. They came to witness a fight no one had expected between two women who were never meant to stand on the same ground. A rich daughter with a black belt and a maid who came through the back door. Kenya said little the entire morning. She went about her tasks like every other day. She cleaned the glass, arranged the dessert table, checked the placement of the teacups. But anyone paying close attention would have noticed something different. Her stillness carried weight, not nervousness, focus. The kind of quiet found before a storm. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that clears the air. When the time came, she changed alone in a small room near the side shed. She did not wear a guy, no belt, no label. Just a fitted white shirt, simple black pants, and bare feet. She tied her hair into a tight bun, looked into the mirror one last time, and saw no pride, no fear, only resolve. She did not come to prove anything. She came to end something. Brooke arrived minutes later, walking through the crowd like it was a red carpet. Her spotless name, stitched in gold black belt, nodded perfectly. She smiled at the guests, shook hands, waved as if everything was already decided. But deep inside her eyes, behind the performance, was something beginning to crack. Kenya stepped into the circle without a word. Her step silent, her expression unreadable. She did not smile. She did not look around. She did not need to. She stood facing Brooke, feet planted on the mat, hands calm at her sides. A man stepped forward, the unofficial referee, and signaled for the match to begin. Brooke struck first, fast and precise. Her movements textbook perfect. A sweep, a grip, a shift of weight. Kenya stepped back, adjusted, let the pressure come. She did not resist, not yet. She allowed Brooke the illusion of control. Gasps and claps rippled through the guests. They thought the outcome was set. They were wrong. Brooke moved in again, aiming to trap. But Kenya shifted her hips with the grace of someone who had danced through darker storms. A quick pivot, a sudden torque, and Brooke lost balance. It happened in seconds. Kenya dropped low, locked both arms around Brooke's leg, and with a fluid motion turned the tide. Brooke fell, not from force, from precision. A hush fell over the garden. Brooke gasped, scrambled to respond, but Kenya already had her in a clean arm lock. Her technique was silent, clean, and impossible to counter. Brooke struggled, but her position was sealed. Kenya leaned in close and whispered, "You wanted to expose me. Now, look who is exposed." Brooke tapped the mat. Defeat. There was silence. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then more. Not for spectacle, but for truth, for dignity, for what had just been revealed before their eyes. Kenya stood, breathing steady. She did not raise her arms. She did not bow. She extended a hand to Brooke, but Brooke turned away, jaw clenched. From the edge of the crowd, Ethan stood watching, his eyes wet, his chest heavy. He had never been more proud of anyone in his life, and never more certain that the woman standing before them was about to change his world. Kenya stepped off the mat slowly. She did not smile. She did not glance back. She did not need validation. She had not fought for applause. She had fought for something deeper, for the right to be seen, and for the first time she was. On the upper balcony, George Whitmore stood watching, arms folded, expression unreadable. Behind him, Brooke walked alone back up the stairs, her pride in shambles, her shadow long and shaken. But the night was not done, and neither were the consequences of what had just happened. The sun began to dip behind the trees just as the match ended. Its golden light stretched long across the lawn, still marked by the echoes of a confrontation no one would soon forget. Guests began to rise from their chairs, some in silence, some still whispering in disbelief. A few looked around, perhaps searching for Kenya, but she had already slipped back inside through the side door. No victory pose, no celebration, because she had not come to win. She had come to end something that should have ended long ago. Brooke rose slowly from the mat. Her guy now crooked her black belt, no longer a symbol of control, but a fragile memory of it. She said nothing. She walked up the stairs of the mansion, her back straight, as if to protect what was left of her pride. But her shoulders betrayed her, and her silence was louder than any scream. Inside, Kenya washed her face in a small room near the kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from release. The pressure of years now spilled out in quiet waves. She looked into the mirror. No fear, no anger. Just a woman who had walked through fire and come out steady, still standing, still here. As she stepped back into the hallway, heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. Brooke's voice pierced the quiet like a blade. So that is it. You did not want respect. You wanted the Whitmore name. People turned. The staff froze. A few lingering guests glanced over. Kenya stood still, her face unreadable. I am not sure what you mean. Brooke laughed, a sound brittle and sharp. Of course you are. You seduced my brother, played humble, and now you want a seat at the table. That is what you people do. Pretend to be victims while you climb over others. Ethan appeared walking toward them from the far end of the hallway. His voice was louder than expected. That is enough, Brooke. She turned, startled, but he did not stop. You want to talk about manipulation? Look at yourself. You only see your own reflection. Since we were kids, everything had to revolve around you. If someone shines, you dim them. If someone is loved, you mock them. Kenya did nothing but exist, and that terrifies you. Brooke stood speechless, her face a mix of disbelief and something far more human, pain. Their father, George Whitmore, stepped forward, trying to defuse the moment. But Ethan raised a hand. No, Dad, this is not your moment. This moment belongs to the truth. Kenya turned to the housekeeper and spoke with quiet dignity. I will finish my shift tomorrow. Everything will be clean, but after that, I will not return. Ethan stepped forward. You do not have to leave because of her. Kenya looked at him gently but firmly. I am not leaving because of her. I am leaving because I deserve to live somewhere I do not have to explain my existence. And with that, she walked away, her steps unhurried, her head high. No one followed, no one stopped her, because no one had the right to. Brooke remained frozen. She looked around, saw the eyes watching her, no longer admiring, no longer amused, just tired. Even her father avoided her gaze. For the first time in her life, she was not the center. She was the silence that followed something real. Ethan stood in the hallway long after she was gone. His heart burned with a quiet fury, not at Brooke, but at himself. For not seeing sooner, for not doing more. Kenya was gone. And something inside him knew that when she walked out of that house, she had taken something sacred with her. Night fell over the mansion, but the lights remained on, not for a party, not for guests, but because every person in that house was now awake to a truth they had once ignored. Ethan walked slowly down the halls, past the family portrait, past the dining room where names were praised and people forgotten. He passed the kitchen where Kenya had once stood invisible, and now without her it all felt hollow. He did not understand every emotion racing through him, but he understood one thing. Tomorrow, when that door closed behind her, it would no longer be his home either. The next morning rose quietly. The mansion was still, the air tense, as if it too was trying to process what had unfolded the day before. In the servant quarters, Kenya folded her clothes with care, each crease pressed like a ritual. Her uniform hung neatly by the door. She had not cried, she had not spoken much, but her silence held more than words ever could. It was not the silence of someone walking away defeated. It was the silence of someone who had finally let go of a weight not hers to carry. Downstairs, the Whitmore kitchen bustled out of habit, but it felt off. The rhythm was broken. The staff moved with hushed voices and soft footsteps, casting glances toward the hallway where Kenya usually passed through first. The woman who had been invisible for years had now left behind a space no one could fill. She had never raised her voice, never asked for more than dignity. But now everything felt different because for the first time people saw her. And that kind of seeing did not fade. Ethan stood by the window in the guest library. A mug of coffee sat untouched in his hand. Outside, the garden looked the same, but inside him everything had shifted. He kept replaying the sound of Brooke's voice, the way it cracked, not out of remorse, but out of collapse. She had lost something she never admitted to holding: control, image, and Kenya had not taken it. She had simply refused to be beneath it. When Kenya walked in with her final tray of folded linens, she met Ethan's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. She walked toward him, placed the tray gently on the console table, then turned to face him fully. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For showing me what real looks like?" Kenya tilted her head, the slightest smile rising at the edge of her mouth. It was never hidden. You just needed to want to see it. He took a step forward, but she raised her hand gently. "Do not say things just because it is quiet now. The world gets loud again. People forget." "I will not," he said. She looked at him with a softness that held history. "Then do not forget yourself either. It is easy to become part of the house that raised you. Harder to be the person you were before it." Their moment ended not with a promise, but with something stronger. Understanding. Kenya picked up her small suitcase. She had packed light. She always did. There was no need for weight when you already carried what mattered inside you. As she reached the front door, the butler opened it for her without a word. His eyes glistened, but he bowed his head. She walked past him with quiet grace. On the second floor, Brooke watched from behind the curtain. Her face pale, lips pressed tight. Her hands trembled, but she refused to turn away. Watching Kenya leave was like watching the end of a story she thought she had written. Only now she realized she had been a side character in someone else's truth. George Whitmore sat in his study, the door slightly open. He saw her shadow pass and closed his eyes. For years, he had built his legacy on structure and silence, but he had not known strength until it walked out his front door in plain black pants and quiet dignity. Kenya stepped onto the front steps, the wind catching her collar. She stood still for a moment, letting the air hit her face. Then she walked forward, not with haste, but with purpose. Her steps echoed down the long driveway past the gates, past the statues and hedges that once felt so tall. She did not look back, because everything she needed was already in front of her. Behind her, the mansion remained standing, but something inside had cracked, not violently, not loudly, but undeniably. What Kenya left behind was not chaos. It was clarity. And for those who remained, it would take more than time to understand how one woman with nothing to prove could reshape everything. 6 months passed. The Whitmore estate no longer hosted Sunday matches or extravagant dinners. The garden, once the centerpiece of display, had grown quieter, more human. George Whitmore stepped down from several boards. He began showing up at local community meetings, sitting in the back, listening more than speaking. Something had shifted in him. The kind of shift that does not come from scandal, but from reflection, from watching your house stand tall while your values fall apart. Brooke remained in the mansion, but her presence was no longer announced by laughter or high heels tapping on marble. She kept to herself, rarely leaving her room except for work. The few guests who did come noticed the change. Some whispered that she was recovering. Others said she was simply waiting. But none of them truly understood that Brooke had not lost to Kenya on a mat. She had lost to a mirror she refused to look into. As for Ethan, he sold the car that once turned heads on every street. He moved into a modest apartment closer to the heart of the city. He started volunteering at a community dojo, one where kids with nowhere to go came to learn not just how to defend themselves, but how to respect what they saw in the mirror. Sometimes he caught himself staring at the doorway, half expecting Kenya to walk in. She never did. But every move he taught, every lesson he gave, carried her shadow. Kenya, meanwhile, did not disappear. She simply reappeared somewhere else. She took a job managing operations at a small local shelter where order was earned and titles meant less than time spent. Her hands were never idle. She organized, she cooked, she listened. And when the young women there asked her how to survive, a world that seemed to push them into silence, she did not give speeches. She gave them truth. She said, "You cannot change where you come from, but you can choose what you carry with you." Dignity is not something they hand out. You claim it. By walking when they expect you to crawl, by speaking when they expect you to bow. One afternoon, she received a letter, a simple envelope. Inside, a folded note written in Ethan's clean handwriting. It read, "I am still learning, but I started because of you." She placed it in the back of her notebook, not because she needed it, but because it reminded her that some change does not make noise. It grows slowly like roots beneath a surface that once seemed hard as stone. Years later, someone wrote an article about her, not a headline. Just a small piece about women who built quiet revolutions. Kenya's name was tucked between stories of lawyers, nurses, mothers. But those who read it could feel something different in her paragraph. Not because she did more, but because she had once stood in silence and made an entire house listen. The Whitmore mansion still stood, its windows polished, its halls echoing with a different kind of emptiness, not from absence, but from awareness. Everyone who had once looked past Kenya now walked slower through the corridors. They spoke softer to the staff. They learned to see what could not be unseen. And in some small way, even Brooke began to shift. She took over the family foundation. But instead of using it for branding, she began funding programs for girls in underrepresented communities. No one gave her applause. Kenya never reached out, but somewhere deep inside her, Brooke understood. Redemption does not start with forgiveness. It starts with truth. One evening, Ethan stood by a bench in the city park where the trees rustled gently and the streetlights glowed warm. A young girl walked by wearing a dojo hoodie and holding a notebook with Kenya's quote scribbled in the corner. He smiled and looked up at the stars. No grand ending, no music swelling. Just a quiet peace that comes when you know someone left the world better than they found it. Kenya never returned to the mansion, but her presence lingered in the places that had once erased her, in the hearts of those who now remembered her face, in the eyes of girls who walked taller because someone before them refused to kneel, and that more than any trophy or title was victory.